Welcome. I'm Dr. Vinay Prasad. I'm a hematologist-oncologist, and I'm Associate Professor of Medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. In my professional life, I see patients, I teach trainees, and I do research in healthcare policy. This is Plenary Session. Plenary Session is a podcast at the intersection of medicine, oncology, and health policy, and you're listening to Season 3. On this week's episode. On today's episode, I have an interview with Dr. Saurabh Jha. He is a radiologist at the University of Pennsylvania, and we'll be talking about the importance of debate and dialogue, what it used to mean and what it means in this modern age. Stay tuned. But first, a plug. On Plenary Session, we've heard listener feedback, and we're going to try something new. We're going to take our long episodes and we're going to put them out piecemeal, little bit, just as you've asked, and then we will see what happens and how people listen. So, the experiment's on. If you like this podcast and want more content, follow me on Twitter at vprasadmdmph. Check out the YouTube channel, Vinay Prasad, MD, MPH. Patreon backers will get access to the slides for lectures I give on Plenary Session. Want to hear from us? Email us your question at plenarysessionpodcast@gmail.com. I'm back in Plenary Session, joined via Zoom by Dr. Saurabh Jha. Dr. Jha should need no introduction to folks who are active online or in the real world. Dr. Jha is a radiologist at the University of Pennsylvania. He did his medical training in the United Kingdom, and I think spending time in the United Kingdom has given him a refreshing perspective on the world. He is a great believer in dialogue, in discourse, in the dialectic, and it's my pleasure to have him here to talk about many things, medicine and beyond. Dr. Jha, it's a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you, Vinay. Thanks for the invitation.
Finally, we get to talk. I don't know if we've ever talked on the phone before or via Zoom as we're doing now.
No, it's just beyond Twitter.
Yeah, just beyond. This is beyond Twitter.
With and without the emojis.
But obviously, we've talked a lot online, typing, pecking away at our words. I wonder where we should dive in. I think one thing that I want to probe with you is the ability to engage in debate. I mean, I want to talk to you about that. I wonder if you might tell us a little bit about your background. I know you did your medical school at Guy's in the UK. I know you're a fan of Christopher Hitchens, and you're somebody who's long believed in the importance of a good dialogue, and maybe also with a good beer. How do you think about dialogue, debate, and what were your medical experiences like in the UK that motivated you in this space?
Yeah, so I was raised mostly in England. I got there when I was quite young. And the education that I got was what would be considered a classic education, very much old school, rhetoric-based. Quite a bit of emphasis on debating. But one of the first things you're taught is that you have to articulate your opponent's view before you can even begin to rebut them. So
of course, yeah. You
don't get into the weeds of misrepresentation and strawman arguments. But, the major difference was that even at university, the dialogue and the discourse, there were political opinions that people had. I was very much left-leaning at the time, which would indicate that I'm not anymore, not as much as I was. And Mrs. Thatcher had a great stature at the time. Actually, she had left John Major to come around.
I see.
And there was Neil Kinnock.
So this is 91, 92, John Major 92. Yeah, okay.
The discourses you had at the time weren't toxic. And also, most people considered all politicians to be idiots. It was really a case of who was less of an idiot versus the other. And they didn't take any moral dimensions. So mostly I remember having arguments with college conservatives. And they were, very straight-laced. They wouldn't drink as much as the people who were more left-leaning. And then there were religious arguments as well. And they were with Christians and Muslims and mostly those two. More in the sense of does God exist or not?
Right.
And I don't think it ever got personal. It got heated, got passionate. I felt very passionate about at least not believing in God. And so, that was the sort of type of arguments we'd have. In medicine itself, most of the issues were, if you really could be bothered to take it, animal rights is pretty big at the time. Ethical issues weren't as divided. I think you kind of all knew that there were social determinants of health, and you didn't need to be told that people living in poor zip codes had it worse than people living in richer zip codes. I imagine now that has to be part of pedagogy.
That's right. Apparently, it has to be. Yeah, it's not as obvious as it once was. Yeah.
Anyway, and I used to go to India a lot because we were just one generation away from it.
Yes.
Once you go to India, once you travel in Northeast India, you realize that a lot of things that people think are necessary knowledge at the moment is just assumed. And so medicine didn't take these type of debates. But importantly, I think, and when I came on Twitter, it was around 2014. We would talk about evidence-based medicine. We would talk about epistemology.
Yeah.
What's randomized controlled trials versus knowledge getting up to that. But none of that had any moral dimension to it. You had one belief, you had the other belief, so what? Obviously, as you can see, that 2020 is slightly different. And now the discourse doesn't have that, because for one, when I disagreed with a theist, I didn't think the theist would not know the carpal bones. That's clearly they did. I wouldn't think that they would prescribe somebody high or low doses of medication, because I didn't think that they would be incompetent in a position just for the belief.
Right. But ironically, when you disagreed with a theist as a college student, there was less of a moral dimension than some of the disagreements we're having today, right? Yeah.
That's the surprising bit.
Yeah, you're talking about God.
Yeah, the assumption was, the baseline assumption was that we didn't need God to do the right thing.
Yes.
But we were all kind of in the same wagon doing the right thing. But I didn't think anything less scientifically of it because of these religious disputes. So what has actually happened now, interestingly, is that the two have converged, the science and the morality. So now disagreements on science are no longer just simply disagreements on science. They are disagreements on morality themselves. And once you have them, then you lead to a delegitimization, which means that people can't be bothered to articulate the other person's viewpoints. And that's where discourse falls apart. Discourse falls apart because it becomes lazy and lazy. Part of arguing, enjoying the argument, is actually winning. And you can't win unless you're playing the games, unless you've identified what the game is. And straw man arguments are always in the game because they don't lead you anywhere. And now it's not even straw man, it's not even misrepresentation. It's just simply delegitimization.
Yes.
So you've of course been in the forefront of this.
Hopefully not on the giving end, but on the who knows?
Well, on the receiving end, yes. And one of the things I noticed was that you did something on school kids. You've been quite vocal about school kids.
Yes.
And the COVID restriction. There should be a general agreement that education is important.
Yes.
We shouldn't be debating that. Now it's a case of, is this a worse net path than restricting them at school? And that isn't a moral argument at all. That's sort of that's a
empirical argument. Yeah.
Scientific argument. So how people can make that a moral issue, say you're a granny killer, that's really where I think we're having a big problem. Science is actually amplifying the morality.
That's what I mean? Yeah. I guess I just want to start by the beginning of what you're saying, which is that, I didn't have a college in the, in the United Kingdom tradition, but I remember being a college student and engaging in a lot of the same things that you describe. Sitting around with a group of, I think, thoughtful people. We found each other, and having some drinks and having a good dialogue. And I think the things we debated heavily when I was a college student, which seems like about a decade after you, was one, of course, God, the existence of God. That's a perennial topic for young debaters to, I think, hone their chops on. The other one is a sense of what is a just a government, progressive government. Is that the just government? Libertarian government? People had strong views, but I remember that despite the fervor, the aggressiveness of the debate, we were always trying to do our best to, I think, as you say, articulate the opponent's view fairly. Of course, you won't win if you don't. I mean, in actual face-to-face dialogue, the anyone sitting on the sidelines, the other people at the dinner party, they can tell you're doing an asshole job of articulating the opponent's views, and they're not gonna give you any credit. So we have to do that when you're actually debating somebody. And then the other thing is, I never thought that the person I was debating was a bad person. They were almost always somebody who I was friends with, who I had a great deal of affection for. And so the fun part was the dialogue itself. It was a type of amusement and a way to kind of sharpen your wit and your mind. And I think that's different in social media. Although, you point out wisely, because I think I joined around the same time you did, 2014, 15. I think we were able to have debates. Of course, some of them got quite heated and people got angry at each other and there were mutes and there were blocks and those kinds of things. But we were able to debate, and I don't think anyone called anyone's boss. I don't think anyone, led a campaign to get the other person fired or disbarred. That has shifted a lot. That's changed a lot in the last year and a half, would you say?
Yeah, no, that has been one of the more ungracious elements of the whole thing, and that's what makes it difficult to debate, because you don't know what the other person is going to do. Consequences. It's become the consequences. It's not so much the government restricting. You mentioned Hitchens actually had a nice discussion with Shashi Tharoor. You should YouTube that, on free speech. And Hitchens pointed out that it's no longer the government locking you as a dissident. Every journalist wants to be locked as a dissident. It's the university, it's your colleagues. And the question is, why do they want to muzzle? What's this penchant for muzzling people? Mm-hmm. And I think it again comes down to the very fundamental thing that it's now assuming moral dimensions. So when you think that a certain person, I've also had complaints to my chair, who knows me very well and knows that I can be a little flippant, as I am when it comes to grand rounds and asking the question, saying, "Oh my God, it's him again." He's asking. But obviously, if you don't know me, you might not arrive at that precise conclusion. And I think it's because once you start thinking, here's this guy, rogue rad. He's immoral. He's a bigot. He's whatever. Then you don't feel any compunction in actually phoning up the boss because you think you're doing some sort of public service. And I think that's the key difference. The question, of course, is how did this morality rise when we're supposed to be more enlightened now than ever before? We're supposed to be more science-based now than ever before. I think philosophers would say that, when people stopped believing God, they didn't stop believing in something. They started believing in other things. And when you took God away, you had other churches, and so we were always this way inclined. And instead of some magical figure in the sky that didn't exist, that became our external frame of reference. Now it's promotion committees and this wider network of people that we wish to please and gain their and it becomes it's both an echo chamber and also a self-affirming chamber.
Yes, I wonder if you might give me your 2 cents on specific instances. So I'm gonna give you a couple. You tell me what you think. I see right now as we speak, John Mandrola is getting himself in trouble. You know John Mandrola. John Mandrola, obviously, is a terrible human being. That part's clear. But here's what he said that got himself in trouble. There's an article that appeared in the New York Post. It's, I guess the headline is, "Why is the left lashing out at Joe Rogan in his groundbreaking podcast?" I think it's supportive of Joe Rogan's podcast. Full disclosure, I've listened to several episodes, but full disclosure, I haven't listened to all the episodes. Here's why John Mandrola writes. Oh no, this is a quote from the article. Quote, Rogan is a fundamentally critical thinker who formulates his views on a case-by-case basis rather than adhering to ideological narratives, end quote. And John Mandrola writes, why is this controversial? And I see he's quickly learning why on Twitter, why this is controversial. And I guess I would say, why have I listened to some of these episodes of Joe Rogan? I would listen when, he brings on somebody who I'm interested in a great deal for 3 hours, and I want to know what that person has to say. And I would say there are things I like about the show. I think at sometimes he's quite an earnest interlocutor. He's quite good at getting the guest to speak up. And I've listened at other times and I cringe because I think there's some issues that he has some dogmatic view that I probably don't agree with. And he just keeps banging on about his view and he doesn't let his guest talk. And that's what, rubs me the wrong way. And I say, oh, God damn it, Joe Rogan, shut up and let this person talk and let them say their view. Anyways, those are my feelings. But I guess I would say that any person, Joe Rogan, any person, has got probably some views that you may agree with. Probably also has some views you may disagree with. Is listening to such a person with a mixed set of views that you agree and disagree with, is that bad? Is that problematic? What do you think about John's tweet? John,
it's hard for me to take these reactions seriously. A few people have pointed out that John may be a little naive. He might not have heard, he might not know the full spectrum of the guests of Joe Rogan, who I haven't heard, to be honest. And apparently he has brought on science denialists and anti-vaxxers. So that, those are legitimate objections. That's well, you probably don't know that this guy brings on science denialists. If you care about that, you might not like him. I think that's fine.
But actually, no, I want to push you on that. I mean, I guess the claim is, if some of the episodes are people with those points of view, science denial, vaccine, whatever you just said, or other loathsome, objectionable points of view, could even be fracking, it could even be, I don't know, something absolutely unconnected to medicine. Simply because a person is hosting a show and some of the guests are objectionable, do we have to throw the whole show away? I think that's
no,
yeah,
not.
right. Yeah.
There are the most famous talk shows in the world have always invited people from the fringes of society.
Of course, yeah. Even 60 Minutes had Ahmadinejad.
Right. Yes. And there's this guy in India, Arnab Goswami. He's had a whole host of characters on his show.
Yeah.
I think that people sometimes want to hear what fringes of society say.
Yeah.
And sometimes, I think there is a case we made to humanize people in the fringes so that you don't start hating each other that much. But whatever that is, there were one or two responses to John that were like, you brought this up and you've hurt my feelings. I thought, all right, this is getting a little ridiculous. And this is where, this almost becomes like the purity test. There's these purity tests that happen that it's not enough that you agree with me. You must show that you agree with me. You must be 100%. And that's where things start getting a little creepy and unnecessary, I must say. I mean, you don't need to have that. You don't need to it doesn't really help your cause. It doesn't do any good. It just gets people to natter about the censorship as opposed to the actual content. John gets it quite a bit, and he seems to get a disproportionate response. I think he once said something to the order of don't just try and build your follow account.
Wait, don't just try to, let's say it again?
Build your follow account. Or, don't drive fear in the COVID era to build your follow account.
Yes. And what? People didn't like that.
People didn't like that.
Even though that's what they're guilty of doing.
You had a lot of that. You had that professor from Penn who said that curricula spends too much time on
Stanley Goldfarb.
Yeah.
I hope. I believe he's been drawn and quartered, is my understanding.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think when he said those things, he'd already moved a notch down.
Oh, yes, he had already stepped down a little bit. But that's a good example. That's an example that I thought was quite interesting. It was a Wall Street Journal editorial. And, to be honest, I don't know if people know this, but, I'm generally not a fan of Wall Street Journal editorials. I'm always on Twitter complaining about the latest Wall Street Journal editorial because they always say things that I don't like cancer drugs are all wonderful even though they improve survival one day. Stanley Goldfarb writes some editorial, and I guess he's a very senior physician, and I think, maybe people are not going to like my characterization, but I think his general view was that medical curriculum ought to focus on training exceptional clinicians, i.e., people who can see people, understand illness, diagnose illness, treat illness, and then he said that these other issues, he does not think the curriculum ought to train physicians. Those issues I think he delineates are issues of social justice, issues of climate change. I think he listed a few. And of course, that's just his opinion, of course. I'm somebody who does a great deal of work looking at the relationship between drug approval, monetary policy, wealth, and socioeconomics and socioeconomic determinants of health. And I think there's quite a deal of ways in which those intersect. At the same time, I should note that, when you are a practicing clinician, you don't always get into all those things. Sometimes you do, to some degree, get into somebody's unique situations. But often you do, just try to do the best you can in the system we have. You can't always reform it. So I wear two hats, I think. Anyway, this is his view. He got a lot of criticism for it, and I think people really condemned him. What are your thoughts on this? It's been a long time since I looked at this story.
Yeah, at the time, I thought there were two categories of responses. One was humorous, basically saying that I think it was hashtag Goldfarb challenge. I thought that was quite funny.
Hashtag Goldfarb what?
Challenge. Where they said I know about Golgi bodies or Golgi bodies or something, and yet I understand climate change, meaning the two are not mutually exclusive.
Right.
I just intubated somebody and I know about social determinants of health.
Right.
So I know the Krebs cycle. Krebs cycle is one that is easy.
Yeah, my favorite. Yeah, my favorite one.
There was that. Then there was a level of anger that seemed, again, it was bordering on the morality. And if you cut it down to what he was saying, and a lot of people have said that, I've said it in different guys. I said that Lancet should not be wading in the human dispute. My major concern for saying that was that I thought it would sully the relationship between doctors of India and Pakistan Radiology who work together in various hospitals in Britain. And a journal has no business doing that. And it's not really going to solve the problem, but it can make...
This is the Kashmir and Lancet editorial.
So
my understanding is Richard Horton has the map and he's actually drawing the boundary.
Oh, well, he has this worldview that Lancet and doctors can solve everything, but then it leads to a little bit of a problem because every major conflict is a public health problem. Doesn't mean that it's necessarily in the province of doctors. One can go back and forth in this. There's no doubt that social determinants of health affects virtually everything that we do. But it's not to say that we have particular unique insights into how to solve these issues. And certainly, as I mentioned earlier on, it doesn't require much common sense to understand that. You don't need a 3-month curriculum. If you really want spend some time in primary care, which is really what I did. We all had to spend some time in primary care, and my rotation was in Brixton, and this is Brixton and Camberwell back in 1994. And it wasn't. I don't know if you've been to London recently. It's now really refurbished, the whole area.
Yes.
At the time, it wasn't, and the disparities between what was the Northern Line tube stops were incredible. You had Pimlico on one hand, and you had. You don't need to be taught that. It's just obvious.
See, I guess and I mean, and to give I think this argument a little bit more depth. I think, you would say, the way you articulated it is that every conflict is to some degree also affects human health. And that's especially true for war, for border disputes, for all these things. I mean, obviously there will be some people whose health and prosperity will be affected by these socio-political conflicts, global political conflicts. And you say it's not the doctor's duty to solve all these things. And part of that, you also would concede that none of these editorials are saying that any individual doctor can't have an opinion or can't voice their opinion. The editorial is taking a sort of, my understanding is a very nuanced position, which is that you are free as a doctor who cares passionately about any global political issue to insert yourself, as any citizen is, in any issue and fight for what you believe in. At the same time, I think these people would argue that ought not be the core purpose of the curriculum. The curriculum should teach you to be a doctor. If you so choose to go inject yourself in the Kashmir border dispute, to be honest, which I know nothing about, even though, my parents are from India. I know nothing about that dispute, and I would be in no position to comment. But you're free to do that if you were to wish. But we should not take the curriculum, the precious time we have, and spend teaching you about that, charging you in that capacity. So I think one of the things people said to him was, "Who are you to tell me I shouldn't care about these issues?" I don't think that's what he was saying. I think he's saying that you're free to care about those issues. In fact, care passionately. But while you're here learning this quote unquote MD, we're going to try to focus on. I mean, this is his argument, not even my argument. I actually would disagree because I think what I teach is most important. Anyway, that's my bias. And what I teach is regulatory stuff, which has human dimensions. But his argument is that while you're here, we ought to teach you how to be a doctor. That's his argument. So I think it was already a straw man from the get-go. That's not what he was saying. What do you think?
Right. And what then happened was that you create this... I wrote something in defense. I wrote a tweet in defense. I know him reasonably well. I've interacted with him before. He's a very nice guy.
Horrible human being? Is that what you said?
He shared some Irish babies on the plate for the first week. Very, very smart clinician. And the thing that happened with it, so what social media does is it creates the climate. It creates the burden of proof, so to speak. Because if it's default assumed that he is a bad person, for you now to say that he's not, you have to go to incredible lengths to say that he's not. Or the burden of proof is on you. It inverts everything. So because he said this, it must mean this. And there were lots of stuff written about him. There were editorials in Medscape. There was one in Philadelphia Inquirer. People were distancing themselves from him. And then you just had this. It wasn't a debate. There was no discourse of it. It was just. And people might say, well, there was nothing to debate about. And I would say that's not true, as you said as well. That there is something to understand and debate in the whole thing, but the reaction, which is why I think Twitter is not really the medium where these thorny issues can be explored. I think it's a Sisyphean task. I think there are people that are interested in exploring these issues. But it has to go beyond that. It has to go in podcasts and long form.
Yes, what we're doing. Yeah. Well, I have a theory of what happened. I mean, I think you're accurate in your characterization. I would agree with you wholeheartedly. The response wasn't, what is Stanley Goldfarb saying? What is he saying right? What is he saying wrong? What is he saying that I object to? That wasn't the response. The response was that simply by virtue of an older, senior white man saying this, Stanley Goldfarb is a bad human being. He's a horrible person. I don't know how he skated by at the University of Pennsylvania all these years. He's a bad person. It was a referendum on who Stanley Goldfarb is. Bad person, bad human being. Everything he says is bad. And so that was quickly the narrative. And so anyone who would say anything otherwise, it doesn't matter, millions of hours of person time with Stanley Goldfarb cannot trump the fact that, by saying this one op-ed, he's a bad person. We're not going to engage with the substance of his argument. We're not even going to try to paraphrase his argument. Obviously, it's a loathsome argument that doctors should not comment on these issues. Now, I actually think my hypothesis is that reaction ironically helps Stanley Goldfarb's argument. That's my hypothesis, because there are a lot of people on the sidelines who aren't, coming to the We Hate Stanley Goldfarb rally. They secretly are getting more solidified in their view that medical education is not teaching people to be doctors, but rather teaching people about social justice issues at the expense of being a great clinician. They're becoming more and more solidified in that view. I think the irony, the grand irony of the story, and all of these stories where, it becomes a referendum about the person and not what they said, not the idea that they are really, to be honest, it's not a perfectly original idea. Actually, it's a quite old idea that I've heard many incarnations of. He's just the latest incarnation, and by not confronting the idea and confronting the person, I fear you actually fuel the idea in circles, in places, in rooms that you don't get to see. And so I've always advised that it is a great mistake. You don't defeat ideas by hanging people who said them. You defeat ideas by showing others what are the structural things wrong with the ideas.
Yeah, that nobody really has time for. In a sense, it's the laziest heuristic.
Yes.
So if you can demonize, you don't have to actually formulate an argument. And the mixing of medicine and politics, again, you can go on and on about this for hours. People will quote Workhoff. People will say, of course, it's the doctor's business. But one of the things that happens when doctors start wearing political hats is that they no longer appear neutral. And once you don't appear neutral, there has to be a profession that every person looks at and says, all right, it doesn't matter what's going on in the world, what the bias is, but I know that you are there for me regardless. Once doctors stop being neutral and start becoming politicized, then it's a case of who they're politicized for. Then you have, well, are you a Republican doctor? Are you a Democrat doctor? And nowhere has this been more prominent in this particular pandemic, where you've seen, and this is both sides. I know people hate both sides, but it's both sides actually. You see one side that's absolutely politicized hydroxychloroquine,
yes,
and the other side that has taken the potentiality of COVID and altered the burden of proof there. So like with COVID myocarditis, COVID encephalopathy, long haul COVID. We now have to prove that it doesn't exist as opposed to it exists.
Right. And just one more thing about the hydroxychloroquine. The other side, the left on the hydroxychloroquine, they made it seem that if you take one hydroxychloroquine, you'll have QT prolongation, R on T, and you'll be dead. I mean, they really drummed up the cardiac side effects, right? Yeah. Well,
I'm a radiologist, so the only drug I prescribe is iodine contrast. But It's been used for malaria and SLE and rheumatoid, perhaps.
Yes, a lot of people take it, and I don't see them dropping. I mean, I've said at the outset, I think it was unlikely to have any role in SARS-CoV-2. I think I was a huge skeptic. I'm a skeptic about the prior probability a drug works in most things. That's my inclination. That's not a political inclination. That's an inclination that comes from many years of empirical science and pretest probability of drug success. So I came in and I said it's not going to work, but I noticed that it quickly became just a disaster. And I would argue the masks became a disaster in the same space because, now the mask is. I can see all these young Democrats wearing their masks, and but it's really a joke. But it's become too polarized, and I think you're right. I mean, I don't know. I sometimes struggle. I can't imagine, but imagine I was in some, rural part of this country and I'm, a Trump supporter. I would, I can't imagine, but I imagine I am. And then I go to see a doctor, a cardiologist, and I Google my cardiologist, and the cardiologist, I look through the cardiologist's tweets, and, everything is Trump. Everything is Trump. It's, he's an idiot. He's stupid. Cartoon of him. He's an imbecile. He's a moron. And I am a Trump supporter. I mean, I guess let me just analogy. Let's just say I'm a Catholic, and I go to some cardiologist feed, and it's just just Catholics are stupid. Catholics have priests who sexually abuse kids. Catholics are bad. Catholics. I mean, won't I feel like the hell? I gotta find a new cardiologist. I don't know about this dude.
Yeah, it's one of the first things my dad told me when I was being a physician is that, you have to put aside well, he wasn't talking about politics. He was talking about religion because that was more relevant in our culture at the time. So my dad, who is retired, or at least should be retired, in workaholic, so he weren't retired. He was a GP for most of his life in an area that had a lot of Pakistani origin people.
I see.
And also Sikhs, a few white people, but mostly particular catchment area was for subcontinent. And he's a Hindu, but he said that he never wore the differences of religion on his sleeves. So, and his Pakistani patients loved it. Because as far as they were concerned, now if he was some sort of Hindu fanatic, that,
yes,
I support Modi and I do this and I do that.
Yes.
And then his patients would be put off. But as far as they were concerned, he was a neutral position. And they didn't think that, this guy has no feelings whatsoever about religion. Of course, being a human, he does. Or, having his own baggage and history, he does. But as far as the professional interaction is concerned, or at least, he wasn't on Twitter. There was no Twitter at the time. There's no social media. But there were, you met at various cultures. He never wore either the politics or the religion on his sleeves at all. And only used these things insofar as he could understand his patients better. So if he knew that Ramadan was coming, he was particularly concerned that if you're a Muslim, how are you going to be more compliant with your medication?
Right.
So yes, in a sense, you do need to understand the culture in the context of what pharmacology is, but then you don't have to wear it. And I think the problem now is that too many people, and again, it's both sides. So just to be clear that even on the right and the conservatives, you have positions that are that during the time of Obamacare that were very vocal against it. And they were bringing up personalized medicine and making all these apocalyptic predictions that were idiotic.
Yes, idiotic, yes. I guess, what you say makes me think of one just sort of concrete example of that, which is, I guess I will be the first to admit that I am somebody who thinks social and political issues have an oversized role on human health. That's one of my, fundamental biases, that what we do in healthcare in pursuit of health is a very modest fraction of a modest R squared, if you will, of what we do to health outcomes. Most of what we do to health outcomes is childhood nutrition and taking care of people and educating people and helping people have prosperity, and having equity. I think that's more of outcomes. And I spend a lot of my time researching ways in which the system is broken or quote unquote rigged, especially drug approval and things like that. That's a huge interest of mine. So I'm deeply sympathetic to that view. However, I think there is a difference between acknowledging that the lives of men and women are governed by political and social forces versus being a naked political actor. And I think naked politics can lead you astray. I think the classic example is the schools. Many people, I have been vocal about it, but I wasn't always vocal. I remember in June and July, I read like 1 million papers to try to equip myself with the information to make a judgment. I tried very hard not to be seduced by Mr. Orange, and I tried very hard not to be seduced by the people who hate Mr. Orange. And I tried to just find my own path. And I realized on this particular issue that although I've had disagreements with the president before, he happened to be probably deeply right on this issue, although I disagree with him on probably 90% of issues. So he was right on this issue, but people who were so wedded to politics, whose, background is their Twitter profile and their background is a banner, Biden-Harris, they didn't allow themselves that intellectual exercise. They couldn't approach it as a neutral person. They sided against the president simply because they are opposed to the president. And I think the reality is that liberals, progressives are going to be at least to some degree, complicit in the single greatest discriminatory act of the last quarter century that will destabilize this country for years to come. What do you think?
It's an unfortunate process. The worst thing is, of course, Trump didn't help matters.
Never does.
Just the way he would, he could have been much more empathetic with physicians and just had much more of a leadership role. But yeah, that's a different topic altogether. I think the major issue was that from the very start of the pandemic, at least from the start of the lockdown, it's amazing how rapidly it became politicized. And I guess John Innes was the canary in the coal mine. I'll tell you, when his piece came out, it's on record, I 100% disagree. My frame of thinking is very much of the talent.
Yes, of course, right, which is that fat tail probability. And that was, I think if somebody will dig up, I had a tweet like that in January about fat tail probability events. Yeah, I remember. You disagree with John. Go on, yes.
Yeah, but I just thought the guy is working from a certain frame of reference,
yes.
which is this frame of reference, which is done for virtually everything. I disagree with that. I disagree that you can keep counting. This is what happened in February. There was an infographic in JAMA in February, which said we should be more worried about the flu.
Yes, I remember. And a lot of the same experts who are now COVID pundits on TV came on CNN and they said, "Oh, well, more people die of the flu each year than SARS-CoV-2." I mean, the same people, yeah.
And around the time, I just cringed. Okay, maybe we shouldn't worry about this, but that's not the argument. The same thing was said with Ebola. Right? Well, you should be worried about a vending machine in Ebola.
Right.
And that drove Nassim Taleb really angry.
Yeah.
So, idiots, do you understand there's a difference between these two probabilities? There's an asymmetry of error. In any case, what Unilis said, one would disagree with from a certain frame of reference. But what he said wasn't unusual for what has been said in similar situations at similar times.
Yes.
And he wasn't that far off.
That's right.
Like March 16th, people were saying towards first week of March that we're going to be fine, we're going to be fine. I mean, the New York mayor, who probably didn't make the pronouncement himself, was telling people to go enjoy Paddy's Day. I think they enjoyed it. I enjoyed it in Philly as well, actually.
Right.
And that's his frame. I mean, he, as you know, I spoke to him at great length. And he was willing to make some compromises with Nassim Taleb's frame. So I understand the period of uncertainty. He was saying that can't go on forever. That has to be resolved in about 3-4 weeks. By then you should have more. So that was when the politicization started. And thereafter, what has actually happened on an epistemic front is that the burden of proof was shifted. By the time it came to long-haul COVID and COVID myocarditis, a framework that should have been used by many people who have, I know you're familiar with this, is the overdiagnosis issue.
Right.
Overdiagnosis and how any imaging test, the more sensitive it becomes.
Of course, yes.
It's not a false positive issue anymore. Now it's an overdiagnosis issue. People conflate the two. An overdiagnosis is you're saying somebody's disease and nothing might happen to them, catching subclinical disease and stuff like that. People should have used that same frame, but they reverted to the precautionary principle. And I think there was a discussion that we had on Twitter that unfortunately went sour as well. I'd say not unsurprisingly, but unfortunately, a prominent.
They all go sour. Yeah, they all go sour. I mean, I guess I would also say that, and to make the long COVID story worse, is there were several accounts, not all of them are named Eric, but many are, that just fear-monger incessantly. And long COVID was just another arrow in their quiver of fear-mongering. They're shooting that long COVID arrow, and they just so uncritically accept every myocarditis long COVID story. I can't even bear it. I mean, yes, it's entirely possible that a lot of these are sequela of COVID, but one should wear one scientist hat and try to interrogate that. And one should do it with the acknowledgement that you put people in MRI machines every day of the week, you're going to find things. If you put me in an MRI machine and PET every single day, you will find things. You might find that bad burrito I ate a few weeks ago. Who knows what you'll find, but you'll find something. And then I hope you don't cut it out.
Yeah, no, and so essentially, the burden of proof. And once that happened, now you're having to say that. Now I have to prove that my COVID is not. That's when we're like 20-year study.
Yeah.
Because obviously symptoms aren't reliable because they can be asymptomatic, and echo is not reliable because it can happen by normal. So you're left with having to show it for the next 20 years. So 20 years later, I say, hey, I was right.
Yeah, right.
We moved to the next pandemic by then. But I don't think this is good, man. The problem here is that it's very hard for us to realize that as a medical profession, the amount of credibility that we have lost in this pandemic. And we have lost it not because of the discourse. Discourse would have been good. We lost it not because we said, hey, look, we were wrong in March, but we were right in May. Or we were right in May, wrong in May. In hindsight, no one really said that. Everyone stuck to their own thing. We've lost it because we appeared politicized. Richard Horton got hammered. I don't know if you saw this. So he went on Question Time at the end of March, and on Question Time, the British roundtable, he essentially said that the British government had been complicit in the deaths because of the delay. I'm paraphrasing, I don't know what he said exactly. And he said that there was general scientific consensus from February onwards that this is going to be bad. So one of the people in Boris Johnson's government, and there's no love lost between Horton and Boris Johnson. Yeah. He does not like the Conservatives, and I don't blame him entirely. So one of the people went back and looked at one of his tweets when you had that first publication in Lancet. So Lancet got there before NJM, for the record. They were the first to publish the SARS-CoV thing. And in that particular publication, if you recall, I think it was Jan 17, it was like a pretty shocking case fatality. You of course didn't know the infection fatality at the time. And Horton tweeted that let's calm down the media panic. And this is something that has a low pathogenicity and moderate transmissibility. But that's your first reaction. And then you say that there's consensus, and then you say that. So when he said that, there was a huge backlash on Twitter, and lots of very, very prominent people, public intellectuals, or just people who have the public stage, said, hey, listen, what about your tweet? You're being politicized, or you're Corbynite. And what happens then? People retreat to their echo chambers. So, I might retreat to Penn, and somebody might retreat to the Harvard little echo chamber, and just say, oh, look at these masses, unwashed masses, how idiotic are they? But what's going to happen is the next time you come out, it's going to be the next pandemic, obviously. There has to be. It's statistically
Hopefully
certain.
not in my lifetime, please.
I
know, there will eventually be, yeah. No, I think your point is well taken. I mean, yeah, very well taken. I mean, while you were saying that, I thought of something slightly unrelated, but I want to toss it out there. Because I think it is sort of where we are as a society, and that's the New England Journal of Medicine's dying in a leadership vacuum editorial. All this pandemic going on for months, total fiasco in this country. I mean, management is quite poor. I mean, there's no plan, there's no centralization, there's no testing, there's no, there's not even science. I mean, I don't even know what it is. It's just crazy. And then, when the polls were at their peak, that it looked like Trump will be defeated, the NEJM runs their little editorial, dying in a leadership vacuum, all about how the current administration is crappy. They actually never said Trump. They don't use the word Trump. They're scared to say it. And it just got the predictable Twitter response, which is, look at New England Journal standing up for what's right. And then I came on this podcast and I said that it was, just sort of totally empty because they don't have the guts to say his name. And they're just clearly just virtue signaling that they, don't like him. I mean, and they've never done it. I mean, they're not like Richard Horton in The Lancet, who's, he's commenting on every political issue. They're not like that. This is a journal that has historically remained apolitical. And by doing that, I think they're just going to lose a few people who might be sympathetic to Trump. I don't think they're going to change a single vote in the election. I mean, it was just an empty gesture. What are your thoughts on this editorial?
Yeah, well, there are two elements of this. First is do you change minds? And the second is, do you make a strong statement? The two are actually linked. I think it might have been better in the long run for everybody for a medical journal to be apolitical despite the circumstances. Because their being political has less significance than had they remained apolitical.
That's right. Yes, right.
Because they're being political at the time when Lancet came out and said the same thing. I think BMJ said the same thing.
Right, and Scientific America. I mean, every journal had it was a week of every journal saying that we don't like Trump.
It might have been more, discretion might have been the best part of valor in this particular instance. And they might have gotten more long run that look, this is an apolitical journal that despite the circumstances, they remained apolitical. I don't think that this really achieved anything, and I think that the major issue for not just physicians, but the health community is that they have so nakedly criticized the whole thing. And they could say, well, it's because of Trump. Had it been anybody else, it wouldn't have been this polarized. But I seem to recall that Ebola was also getting to be pretty polarized.
Yeah, I remember.
We were calling the travel restrictions xenophobic.
Yes, I remember. Yes.
And that just muddy, it just sullies everything. It becomes very difficult to recover from those kind of accusations in the sense that it becomes very difficult. You're no longer in the scientific province. You're now in the cultural province. You're now in the Jon Stewart. And who's that British comedian that's very funny?
John Oliver.
Yeah, you guys think he's very funny, don't you? You guys don't know what British comedy is. Funny for American.
Yes, we don't like the dry satire. Yes, well put, yeah.
That's for those people. For people that are in the scientific realm, you have to make arguments that are scientific, political even, but only in the sense that they have pragmatism in it, not political arguments. And I think that's where we, as many of us, have sort of relinquished that and gone on to talk shows to appeal to a crowd that is of a particular political disposition.
Yeah. I think, I agree with what you're saying. I agree with the diagnosis. I worry we are in a not terrific place now, as you I think you aptly note. I think of all the things you said in this conversation, and I know our time is drawing to a close, of all the things you said, the thing that I think is most apt, I think they're all apt, but I think the single takeaway point is that medicine needs to be a profession for everybody. It just has to be, to some degree, a profession for everybody. And it's based on, I think, scientific principles, which are principles for everybody, because it doesn't matter what you believe or what you think. We all agree to a certain set of ground rules. We all agree to that. And people have allowed Trump to change this rule, to make an exception to the rule, because he's the quote unquote worst thing out there. But I don't think he is the worst thing out there. I think what is coming is the worst thing out there. That in retrospect, we may look back with the same way we look back with George W. Bush. That with a little bit of, I miss that guy, even though he did a lot of things that I vehemently and still disagree with, and I think have scarred, the world for 100 plus years. But I think we do miss a lot of things about him. His and I think we may. Can you imagine what Trump is to Bush? What the next person is to Trump? And then where will medicine be? I think that's the question people should ask themselves.
Yeah, no, we're not in the golden era of discourse, to put it that way. I think there was never a golden era, but there was a better era.
There's a better era, that's true, yeah.
I certainly think that compared to the Twitter discussions we used to have in 2017 about orbiter trial,
seems like a
was, did they randomize correctly, and they follow up correctly, and was there selection bias? Compared to what we have right now, I think that there's definitely a categorical shift.
There's only one consistency in my life. Back when Orbita came out, I've had views on Orbita for a long time because we made a prediction that it would turn out the way it did in our book, Ending Medical Reversal. And of course, everyone was on my case. Who's this guy? Even though he's an Indian man, he's not technically a cardiologist. He's not a cardiologist, and so I heard that a million times. This year, I heard a lot of new ones. First, I heard he's not a public health expert, and then I dusted off my degree from Johns Hopkins University School of Public Health, and I showed everyone that degree, and I was like, yeah, I got my degree. And then they said, well, he's not an infectious disease doctor. And so the one consistent theme in my life is that I'm not what I don't have all the appropriate check boxes before you can actually engage with what I'm saying. So that's the consistency. But the disconsistency is we used to agree to some rules, and now it's all out the window.
Yeah, that's not coming right. I think I think what you're going to have on Twitter now is just going to be a statement followed by a bunch of RTs and likes, a few objections here and there, a few quote tweets, but the actual back and forth, I can't see somebody like John Mandrola going back and forth.
Yeah. When
you're saying that you've hurt my feelings. I mean, at that point, what is John Mandrola going to say? I just make little snarky remarks here and there. Try and say something philosophical about the chest radiograph, and I'm reading about PPS-60. I think I do think that there is space for discussion of all of this. I just think that it has to be done in long form with a bunch of people that are interested in this area.
Yeah,
I think there are. I think there's also people interested in reading about this, and there are people who are interested in participating in this sort of discussion. I just don't think that it can be Twitter.
Yeah, no, Twitter is no longer the place for dialogue, for discourse. On that positive note, Dr. Jha, it's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Prasad.
Yep.
And hopefully, when the pandemic is over, we'll have a beer in San Francisco.
That'll be wonderful. I look forward to that day. You've been listening to Season 3 of Plenary Session. Plenary Session is produced by Kiana Klossner. Music by Ian Straley and Audrey Tran. The views expressed on Plenary Session are those of whoever said it and no one else. Plenary Session is not medical advice. Follow us on Twitter at plenary_session. Until next time.